I sat frozen, the glow of the tablet bleaching my hand as the footage rolled on. My son's shoulders filled the frame, moving through my kitchen like it still belonged to him. His voice low and cruel. "Bank of Mom, always open." The pills he stole rattled like coins in a jar. After carrying him through childhood fevers, late-night emergencies, and every debt he swore he'd repay, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a mark, with a limp, caught on my own camera. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The alert came through just after sunset. A soft buzz on Helen Pratt's phone while she was trying to balance her teacup on the arm of her recliner. For weeks, she'd been getting porch notifications, usually a stray cat. Sometimes the UPS man dropping off another box she hadn't remembered ordering. Tonight, she tapped the screen more out of habit than curiosity. The camera feed loaded slowly, her internet as sluggish as her left hand had become since the stroke. A square of light appeared, grainy, showing her front walk. She expected to see a package lifted or maybe a kid with sticky fingers. But the figure that appeared wasn't a stranger. It was Jason. Her son's shoulders filled the frame as he bent toward the lock, slipping a key into her door like he still belonged here. She frowned, leaning closer. He glanced over his shoulder, a quick sweep like a man checking for traffic before running a red light. Then he stepped inside. Helen's throat went dry. She hadn't given him permission. She hadn't even told him the cameras were working again. The clip advanced with a timestamp, 2:17 p.m. Her living room lights dimmed on the screen, Jason moving with too much ease. He didn't knock, he didn't call out. He walked straight to the desk drawer by the hallway. His hand dipped inside, came out with folded bills. He counted them once, stuffed them into his pocket. Helen sat frozen. Her cane tipped, clattering hard against the floorboards, startling her like a gunshot. She rewound the feed, pressed play again, as if she'd misread the pixels. But it was him, her boy who used to leave dandelions on her nightstand when he was 5. The same boy who once cried over a broken action figure. That boy was gone. The man on her screen had different eyes, flat, focused, careless. She tried to swallow, but her mouth had gone to cotton. Her breath came shallow. The footage jumped to another clip, later that afternoon. Jason wasn't alone this time. Becca trailed behind him, her smile tight, her voice clear enough for the microphone to catch. "She won't remember," Becca said, tossing her hair back as she leaned against Helen's counter. "Just act sweet." Helen's chest squeezed like a fist had closed inside her ribs. Jason chuckled, low and sharp. "Yeah, sweet. Mom's got plenty. She always does." Helen pressed pause. The silence in her house rushed in too loud. Her own refrigerator's hum, the tick of the wall clock, her shallow wheeze. Her hands shook as she pressed play again, needing proof even as it tore her open. They laughed in her kitchen, her son leaning against her refrigerator, Becca rifling through a grocery bag Helen hadn't touched yet. They joked about her limp. They said her name like it was a punchline. Helen's eyes burned, but no tears fell. She didn't sob. She didn't even curse. Her body just locked, rigid, like her bones were afraid to move. Her finger hovered over the pause button again, pressing and releasing, over and over, as though repeating the pain might dull it. Each replay carved her a little deeper. She leaned forward, air rasping in and out, and whispered to no one, "Jason." The room tilted. She gripped the chair arm, trying to steady herself. A knock jolted her. The front door creaked, followed by a heavy voice. "Helen? You in there?" It was Ray Dean, the neighbor who checked on her after the stroke, the one who never asked questions he didn't need answered. His boots thudded across the porch. She couldn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the frozen image on her screen. Jason's smirk caught mid-motion. Becca's head tilted back in laughter. Ray stepped inside, saw her hunched with the laptop glow bleaching her face. "Jesus, Helen." He crossed the room quick for a man his age, looking from her pale expression to the paused video. His hand hovered near her shoulder but didn't land. He followed her gaze to the monitor. His jaw clenched. "Tell me," he said, quiet, low, like the start of a storm. "What the hell am I looking at?" Helen didn't speak. She couldn't. Her finger hit play again, Jason's laughter filling the room like smoke, like poison. Ray's face darkened, but he didn't move. Helen sat stiff, breath caught, the video running on, every sound another knife. And then the screen shifted to a moment she hadn't seen yet. Jason looking directly into the lens, as if he knew. The video kept running, spilling fragments of hours Helen had never meant to watch. The light outside her window had gone black, yet the blue glow of the laptop pinned her in place, like a witness under interrogation. On screen, Jason reappeared, same shirt, different hour. His voice carried through the cheap microphone. "Hydros," he muttered, tugging open the bathroom cabinet. "Where'd she stash them?" Helen's hand rose to her own shoulder, where the ache pulsed nightly. She had counted those pills carefully, rationing them like rations in a war. Jason didn't hesitate. He found the orange bottle tucked behind bandages, rattled it, and laughed. Jackpot. Becca's giggle followed, syrupy, cruel. "Your little bank keeps giving," Jason grinned, waving the bottle like a prize. "The bank of Mom, always open, even with a limp." The words landed harder than the theft itself. He mimicked her uneven walk, a jerking sway across her bathroom tiles. Becca clapped, delighted. Helen's face burned. The shame wasn't for what she'd seen. No, it was for what she'd raised. Her fingers trembled against the keyboard, pausing the frame mid-gesture. Jason's mouth open in laughter, one arm crooked like a mocking caricature of her gait. The sight hollowed her. Ray exhaled beside her, a sound rough as gravel. "You going to let this ride?" "Helen." The question dropped into the quiet like a challenge. Helen's throat worked. For years she'd carried excuses for Jason the way some women carried rosaries, fingers on familiar beads of "he's just struggling and he'll grow out of it." Tonight those beads shattered. Her voice, when it came, was steady, flat. "No, I'm going to burn it slow." Ray's eyes flicked to her. He gave a single nod, nothing more. No comfort, no pity, just acknowledgement. Helen pressed stop, then opened the file log. The screen filled with timestamps, endless rows of dates and hours. Evidence. She clicked, printed again. The machine whirred like a heartbeat, spitting out sheets that fluttered onto the desk. The photos she captured, Jason's hand in the drawer, Becca's sneer, the pill bottle in his grip, stacked into a damning pile. She smoothed each page with her palm, as if she were pressing creases out of her own life. She sat back, breath steadying. For the first time all night, she felt the pulse of control, not much, but enough to move. Her phone rested by the laptop. She stared at it. Names scrolled in her mind. Police, lawyer, church. None fit. None felt like the first step. Until one did. Helen dialed, her thumb pressing deliberately. The line clicked, rang twice, then a brisk, professional voice answered. "Adult Protective Services, this is Monica Griggs." Helen's lips brushed the receiver. 3 words left her mouth dry and certain. "I need help." There was no tremor in her tone, no apology, just fact. Monica's pause was brief but telling, like she'd heard that phrase 100 times from 100 mouths. "All right, ma'am, tell me what happened." Helen glanced at the heap of paper, the frozen image of Jason still smirking on her screen. Her heart pounded like a drumline, but for once, it wasn't fear, it was fire. She leaned forward, steady as stone. "I've got proof." Ray shifted his weight, watching her transform in real time. His expression held something new, respect, maybe even pride. But he stayed silent, letting her lead. Helen gathered the stack of printouts, fanned them like cards, and whispered to herself as much as to Monica, "He doesn't know what he started." The printer spit one last page before falling quiet. On the screen, another clip cued automatically. Jason's hand pushing deeper into her bedroom dresser, Becca whispering, "Take more before she notices." Helen hit save. Her voice to Monica sharpened. "I need you to see it for yourself." And for the first time since pressing play, she allowed herself to imagine what came next. Not a confrontation, not a plea, but a reckoning. The clip ran on. Jason turned, pills rattling in his fist, and for one split second, he grinned straight into the lens as if mocking her. Helen didn't flinch this time. She reached for the stack of evidence, her grip firm. Ray broke the silence with a low murmur, half prayer, half warning. "Then it starts tonight." By morning, Helen had hardly slept. The stack of papers sat heavy on her dining table, an accusation that never blinked. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Jason's laugh, low, careless, punctuated by the rattle of her pill bottle. At 10 sharp, a knock rattled the front door. Ray stood just behind the glass, and beside him was a woman Helen didn't recognize. Business suit, practical flats, short hair streaked with gray, eyes sharp as a file. She carried a leather satchel clutched under one arm. "You're Mrs. Pratt?" she asked, voice calm, clipped. Helen nodded, cane pressing into the carpet. "Helen, come in." The woman crossed the threshold without hesitation. Ray stayed near the door, arms folded, watchful. "Monica Griggs," the woman said, offering a hand Helen couldn't quite lift. When Helen gestured toward the table instead, Monica adjusted smoothly, pulling out a chair. "You said you had proof." Helen slid the papers across, one neat pile of screen captures, timestamps, dates. Monica flipped through them with a speed that made Helen's chest tighten. The images that had gutted her only hours ago seemed to register as data points to this woman, familiar, expected. Monica finally stopped at one still frame, Jason with the orange pill bottle, Becca laughing behind him. "This isn't neglect," she said, voice flat. "This is exploitation." Helen let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The word settled over her like a weight, but also like a shield. Exploitation. It had a shape, a category, a place in the law. Monica set the papers aside and opened her satchel, pulling out a tablet, stylus, forms. "We'll start a case today. Financial abuse, probable intimidation. We'll need to document your medical condition too. That stroke? It matters here." Helen blinked. "Matters how?" "Cognitive slippage," Monica said briskly. "Doesn't mean you're incompetent. It means you're vulnerable. And under the law, that changes everything. He can't argue you're just being dramatic. It's already on record that you're at risk." The words hit hard. Vulnerable. Helen had hated that word since the hospital wrote it on her chart. But now Monica wielded it like a weapon, not an insult. Helen rose slowly, shuffled to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out the thick folder of discharge notes, prescriptions, and therapy reports she'd avoided rereading. She set it on the table. "Everything's in here, every appointment." Monica's face didn't soften. No sympathy, just focus. She scanned a few pages, nodding. "Good. This is exactly what I need." Ray's voice rumbled from the doorway. "So what happens next?" Monica tapped her stylus against the tablet. "I file the report today. APS opens the case. Law enforcement gets notified, and Jason won't see it coming. He has no idea this is already on record." Helen's lips parted. She felt the first flicker of something dangerous. Satisfaction. Jason thought he was clever, slipping keys, pocketing cash in the shadows. He didn't know the shadows had eyes now. Ray pushed off the door frame. "And his key?" Helen's stomach turned. The thought of Jason walking back in, easy as ever, made her skin crawl. "I'll change the locks tonight," Ray said before she answered. His tone carried no hesitation, only decision. "No son of yours is walking in here again without you knowing it." Helen looked at him, his weathered face, the certainty in his voice, and felt steadier than she had in days. Monica gathered the papers back into order. "Mrs. Pratt, I'll be in touch within 48 hours with your case number. In the meantime, don't confront him. Don't warn him. Just keep the footage coming." Helen nodded once, a soldier's nod, quiet but resolute. The three of them stood together in the cramped dining room, one woman with the evidence, one man with the tools to bar the door, and Helen in the middle, pulse strong, resolve sharper than it had been in years. As Monica packed up, Helen glanced back at the laptop screen. The playback cue scrolled forward, one more clip waiting to load. She hadn't dared open it yet. The frozen thumbnail made her breath hitch. Jason again, this time in her bedroom, his hand pulling open the top drawer of her nightstand, the one place she still kept her husband's folded flag. The new locks clicked cleanly into place that night, the sharp scrape of Ray's tools echoing in Helen's hallway. She watched from her recliner, clutching the folded flag in her lap as if it were a shield. By morning, she knew Jason would notice. She wondered whether he'd knock, or whether he'd test the key and curse under his breath. She didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, her doorbell chimed, a too cheerful sound that made her stomach knot. Helen steadied herself with the cane and opened the door to see Jason standing there, hands spread in theatrical innocence. "Hey, Mom," he said lightly, as if they hadn't gone weeks without speaking. "Did you change the locks? You okay?" His smile was small, practiced, the same one he used on bank tellers and neighbors. Helen studied it, remembering the footage. That smile had bent into something darker when he thought no one was watching. "I'm just updating things," she said evenly. Jason tilted his head, trying to peer past her into the living room. "Updating things? What for? You don't need new locks." When he shifted his weight forward, angling his shoulder toward the doorway, Ray appeared from the side yard like a storm rolling in. His broad frame filled the entryway, one hand braced against the jamb. "She doesn't owe you an explanation," Ray said, voice low, steady. Jason's expression cracked, the mask slipping just an inch. "I'm talking to my mother," he snapped, trying to edge forward. Helen lifted her cane a fraction, a silent punctuation. "And I've answered." For a long moment, Jason stood taut as a wire, his jaw tight. Then he stepped back, forcing a chuckle. All right, no need to get all dramatic. If you're mad at me, at least say it." Helen met his eyes, letting silence do the work. Jason's phone buzzed in his hand. He looked down, typed something quick, then pivoted on his heel and strode toward his car. The tires spit gravel as he tore away from the curb. Helen's own phone vibrated seconds later. She glanced at the screen. "If you're mad, at least say it. Don't be dramatic." Her fingers tightened around the device until the plastic creaked. She wanted to hurl it across the room, but instead she set it carefully on the counter, face down. By the time Monica arrived that evening, Helen had replayed the scene a dozen times in her head. Monica scanned the text, her mouth flattening into a hard line. "This," Monica said, tapping the phone screen with one manicured finger, "is escalation. He's testing how far he can push. We document it." Helen watched as Monica opened her tablet, logging each detail, the date, the lock change, Jason's attempt to enter, his words, the text. It felt clinical, almost antiseptic, but Helen knew every sterile note was a nail in Jason's coffin. Monica turned the screen toward her. "You're going to learn this too. We don't just wait for him to make mistakes. We build the record, brick by brick." Helen nodded slowly. The thought of writing it all down made her stomach twist, but it also made her feel steadier. She wasn't just a victim replaying footage. She was a witness compiling evidence. Monica handed her a slim incident form, already partly filled. "Write it in your words. Doesn't need to be poetic. Just true." Helen gripped the pen awkwardly, her left hand clumsy but determined. She wrote, "Jason came to the house. He tried to push past me. Ray blocked him. He left angry. He texted me, 'Don't be dramatic.'" Her script was jagged, uneven, but it was hers. She signed it. Monica scanned the page into her tablet. "There," Monica said. "Your first report. The paper trail begins. Ray leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Feels different, doesn't it? Helen looked at the ink drying on the page, at the firm black lines standing as evidence she'd never intended to make. Her chest ached, but beneath it was something stronger, a pulse of resolve. Yes, she said softly, it does. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Jason lit the screen. You'll regret shutting me out. Helen read it once, then lifted her eyes to Monica. What do we do with that? She asked. Monica didn't hesitate. We make it Exhibit B. Helen woke to another alert the next morning, her phone buzzing on the nightstand like an alarm she hadn't set. She almost ignored it, but her hand reached, almost on instinct, and within seconds the footage filled her screen. Becca was in her kitchen, alone. The younger woman drifted through the room with a smirk, tugging the cord from the toaster, then the lamp by the window. She let the plugs hang loose, shaking her head with mock sympathy. She can't even remember where she put her pills, Becca muttered, her voice clear through the mic. She won't notice if the lights don't work. Poor thing can barely walk straight. She dragged her own leg in an exaggerated limp across the floor, laughed, then plugged the toaster back in, still grinning. Helen's breath caught, a low sound escaping her throat. She saved the file, her hands trembling but steady enough to tap send. Monica needed to see this. When Monica arrived that afternoon, she didn't bother with pleasantries. She set her satchel down, reviewed the footage, and shook her head once. That's it, she said. This isn't family drama anymore. This is criminal. Her fingers flew across the tablet. I'll be submitting this directly to APS and the Tacoma Police Department. Helen watched as the evidence, her son's betrayal, Becca's cruelty, became official record. Something in her chest loosened. This wasn't just happening in her living room anymore. It was happening in the system. Monica glanced up. This is bigger than you know. Once the police see this, their hands are tied. They have to act. Ray leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Good, let them. That evening, word spread in a quieter way. Jason's supervisor at the auto parts warehouse received an anonymous email. Grainy clips, a note suggesting he take a closer look at one of his employees. Nobody mentioned Helen's name. By the following week, Jason was called into a back office. He smiled and charmed as he always did, but suspicion had already bloomed. Investigators began asking questions he couldn't joke away. Meanwhile, Ray kept his promise to watch over Helen. One night he parked his truck outside a pawn shop on the edge of town. Jason's sedan rolled up not long after. From the shadows, Ray saw his neighbor's son step out with a plain paper bag. Jason glanced around, nerves sharp in his movements, then slipped the bag to a man waiting by the door. The man disappeared inside. Jason pocketed cash before driving off. Ray didn't intervene. He just lifted his phone, snapped the photos, and sent them straight to Monica. By morning, Monica had already filed a motion. We're getting court approval for a financial audit, she told Helen over coffee at the kitchen table. Bank records, credit card statements, the works. If he's been siphoning more than what we've already seen, it's about to surface. Helen stared into her cup, the steam rising against her lined face. And when it does? Monica's expression didn't flicker. Then we bury him with his own numbers. Ray set the photos down on the table, the pawn shop sign glaring in the background. Got enough nails for the coffin already. Helen listened, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For days she'd been documenting, reporting, building. But there was another piece of business she hadn't touched, one that gnawed at her every night. The will. That evening, she pulled the battered folder from her desk drawer and spread the papers across the table. Jason's name was still there, bold as ever, as if he had any claim to her life beyond the wreckage he'd already caused. Her pen hovered, then struck the page with a resolve that surprised even her. By the time she finished, the veterans nonprofit her husband had once championed stood in Jason's place. Her estate, her home, her accounts, all redirected to strangers who had worn the same uniform he once had. Men and women who would never mock her limp, never steal her medication. She closed the folder, exhaling. The choice felt less like cutting Jason out and more like reclaiming herself. Ray watched quietly from across the room. "That's a hell of a line you just drew." Helen met his eyes, her voice low but steady. "He doesn't get to inherit me." Before either could say more, Helen's phone buzzed again. Another alert from the cameras. She swiped, her pulse spiking. This time, it wasn't the kitchen or the bathroom. The thumbnail showed Jason standing at her porch, alone, his face tilted toward the lens. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't mocking. He looked furious. The pounding started before dawn. Helen woke to the sound of fists slamming against her front door, rattling the hinges, shaking her bones. She gripped her cane and steadied herself before shuffling into the hallway. The porch camera feed glowed on her phone. Jason, wild-eyed, jaw clenched, sweat shining under the porch light. "You're destroying your own family," he roared, spittle flying. "Do you even hear yourself, Mom? You're ruining everything." Helen didn't flinch. She tapped the doorbell app, letting the microphone carry her silence into the night. Every word he spewed, every curse that flew from his mouth, was captured cleanly in digital clarity. Jason pounded again. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me. By locking me out. By turning people against me." He leaned close to the camera, his features warping with fury. "You think strangers will protect you. You think you're safe from me." Her pulse thudded, but her hands stayed steady. She pressed record and let the device do the remembering for her. Ray's truck growled into the driveway moments later, headlights slicing through Jason's rage. He climbed out slow, deliberate, one hand slipping a phone from his jacket. "That's enough," Ray barked across the yard. His voice had the snap of a drill sergeant's. Jason spun, snarling. "Stay out of this, old man. This is family business." Ray didn't blink. "I'm calling it what it is. Elder endangerment in progress." He lifted the phone, his tone clipped as he spoke to dispatch. "Tacoma PD. I need officers at 413 West Oak. Adult son threatening a disabled senior at her residence. Immediate response." Jason's mouth opened, closed. He backed a step. But the fury still burned. "She's lying about me. She's letting outsiders poison her." His voice cracked, more desperate than strong now. Inside, Helen set her cane against the wall and leaned close to the doorbell speaker. Her voice was calm, measured, sharpened by resolve. "I won't be humiliated by the boy I fed." Jason froze, staring at the black lens as if her words had slapped him. The wail of sirens cut through the early morning air. Blue and red strobes lit the siding of Helen's house, chasing shadows across the lawn. 2 officers approached, hands steady near their belts. "Sir," one called out, "step away from the residence." Jason tried for charm, plastering on a grin. "Hey, officers, misunderstanding here. Just checking on my mom. She gets confused sometimes." But the doorbell had been recording. The officers had already heard his tirade on their radios. One held up a hand. "Enough. You've been formally warned. This is trespassing. You come back here again, you'll be in cuffs." Jason's smile faltered. He looked at the door, at the lens, at Helen standing silently inside. For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. His face twisted into raw hatred. Then he turned, stalking to his car. Tires screeched as he tore away, fury spilling in exhaust fumes down the street. The officers lingered long enough to take Helen's statement. She let Ray handle the door while she sat in the living room, her phone still clutched in her lap. Every second of Jason's meltdown had been preserved, tucked safely in digital memory. By noon, Monica was at her table, tablet open, already drafting the motion. "We're filing for a temporary protective order today. This isn't just escalation. This is a threat." Helen nodded. Her face was pale but resolute. "He wanted to shame me into silence. He doesn't get to do that anymore." Ray's jaw worked as he sipped his coffee. "He doesn't realize it yet, but every outburst is another nail in his coffin." Monica slid the form across the table for Helen's signature. The pen felt heavy in her hand, but the ink flowed smooth across the page. Temporary now, but soon permanent. She leaned back, exhaling. Outside, the yard was quiet again. Morning sun soft against the porch, where Jason had stood raging hours before. But Helen knew he wasn't finished. Because men like Jason didn't back down. They broke. Helen stared at the cursor blinking on her laptop screen. For days she had been silent, speaking only in reports and forms, letting Monica and Ray carry her voice into offices and courtrooms. But silence had its own weight. Jason's shouting still echoed in her hallway. His threats still pulsed in her veins. She opened the private page of her local VFW group, the one where she'd shared photos of potlucks and reunion dinners, not confessions. Her fingers hovered. She typed slowly, her left hand dragging, but the words came clean. Stroke didn't break me, but betrayal might have. She hesitated only a moment before hitting post. By evening, her phone buzzed like it hadn't in years. Dozens of notifications flooded in, thumbs up, comments, private messages. Veterans she hadn't spoken to since her husband's funeral chimed in first. Proud of you, Helen. We've got your back. He's a coward for preying on you. You fed a platoon of boys overseas. Don't let one weak man steal your peace. Nurses from her years at the VA hospital joined in. Their comments blunt, furious. One wrote, "He doesn't get to weaponize your care against you. We stand with you." The support spread fast, moving from the closed group to the wider Tacoma community. Friends of friends reshared her post. Neighbors commented under their real names, denouncing Jason without hesitation. His reputation, so carefully polished in public, began to splinter. Jason struck back online within hours. He painted her as confused, claimed she was sick and manipulated by outsiders. He posted old smiling photos of them together with captions like, "Families should stick together, not destroy each other." But Monica was ready. She sent Helen a message. "Don't respond. Let me." That afternoon, Monica filed Jason's smear posts into the official case folder. Then she drafted a public statement of her own, citing Helen's medical records, her stroke diagnosis, the video evidence. She didn't argue feelings, she laid out facts. "This isn't confusion," she wrote. "This is documented exploitation." Helen read it twice, relief and grief tangling in her chest. Jason's narrative unraveled with every screenshot Monica attached, every legal phrase she wielded like a scalpel. For the first time, it wasn't Helen defending herself. It was the truth defending her. 2 days later, Helen stood at the podium of a local seniors group meeting. Her cane rested against the lectern. Her papers shook only slightly in her hand. Faces lined the folding chairs, gray hair, bifocals, walkers resting against knees. Some eyes looked curious, some wary, but all were waiting. She cleared her throat. "You are never too old to be disrespected," she began. Her voice carried, steadier than she'd expected. "And you are never too small to fight back. I thought a stroke would end my strength, but the betrayal of my own son, that nearly did it. Until I realized silence was helping him, not me." Murmurs rippled through the room. One woman dabbed at her eyes. A man leaned forward, nodding sharply. Helen continued, words gathering force like a tide. "I don't want sympathy. I want you to know this. If someone you love turns cruel, if they take instead of give, you are allowed to name it. You are allowed to fight it. And you are allowed to win." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling. Helen stepped back, pulse racing. Her legs trembled, but not from weakness, from release. Afterward, Ray met her at the edge of the room, his rough hands tucked into his jacket pockets. He tilted his head at her, a small, almost proud smile creasing his face. "You're not broken," he said, voice low so only she could hear. "You're loaded for war." Helen exhaled, gripping her cane, letting his words settle. For the first time in weeks, She felt taller. Then her phone buzzed. A new message, anonymous, no name attached. Better hope the law gets to me before I do. The text still glowed in Helen's mind the next day. Better hope the law gets to me before I do. Monica filed it as Exhibit C, but Helen knew Jason wasn't the only one circling. Because when Becca showed up at the APS office, she came dressed like an angel. Pastel cardigan, hair pinned neat, eyes wide with watery innocence. She perched on the edge of a chair across from Monica, hands folded like she was auditioning for forgiveness. I didn't know he was stealing, she said, voice trembling. Jason told me the money was his, that his mother gave it to him. I thought... Her eyes darted to Helen, then back down. I thought it was family business. Helen sat stiff beside Monica, her cane balanced across her lap. She didn't speak. She let Monica do the cutting. Monica slid her tablet across the table, tapped the screen. Footage bloomed, a grainy still of Becca leaning over the cash drawer, laughing while Jason stuffed bills into his pocket. Another tap, and Becca's voice played clear as day. Your little bank keeps giving. The color drained from Becca's face. You were laughing, Monica said, tone even, clinical. Not confused, not misled, complicit. Becca's lips parted, but no sound came out. Helen studied her carefully. For months she'd let herself believe this woman was just background noise, a shadow behind Jason. But shadows had weight. By afternoon, APS updated the filing. Jason and Becca, both named. Not one abuser, but two. Helen's chest tightened with a strange mix of vindication and grief. Every name added to the paperwork was another knot in her stomach, but also another wall between her and them. That weekend, Helen insisted on running an errand herself. Ray offered to drive, but she waved him off. I need to walk into town again, she said. Her cane tapped the sidewalk steady as a metronome until she reached the pawn shop with the flickering neon sign. Inside, glass cases gleamed with rings, chains, watches. Helen's eyes moved slowly, then locked on a necklace displayed beneath the smudged counter glass. Silver chain, small heart-shaped pendant with a hairline scratch down the front. She knew it the way a mother knows her child's voice. Her breath caught. That's mine. The clerk shrugged. Came in last week. No box. No name. Helen's hand trembled as she pulled a photo from her wallet. Herself years younger, wearing the same pendant. It's mine, she repeated, firmer this time. Ray appeared in the doorway, having followed after all. He pulled out his phone and snapped pictures of the necklace, the pawn slip taped under the glass. Evidence, he muttered. Monica filed it within hours, the chain logged as stolen property. Jason and Becca weren't just thieves in theory anymore. They were thieves in record. News spread fast in the digital age. By the end of the week, Becca's online boutique vanished. Her cheerful posts about handmade candles and thrifted jewelry were scrubbed clean. Her Instagram, gone. Facebook, deleted. The sweetness she'd worn like perfume evaporated overnight. But Helen saw through the disappearance. She pictured Becca's hands, the same ones unplugging lamps, mimicking her limp, sifting through her drawers. They weren't soft hands. They were sharp. Ray voiced it bluntly over dinner, his fork clattering onto his plate. She looked soft, he said, shaking his head. But her hands were sharp. Helen nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the necklace now locked in Monica's evidence file. Sharp enough to cut me when I wasn't looking. Silence settled between them, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. But Helen's phone buzzed again, a fresh alert from the cameras. She glanced down, pulse spiking. The thumbnail showed Becca this time, alone, standing on the porch at dusk. No smile, no pretense. Her face pressed close to the lens, eyes cold, as if she knew Helen was watching. The image of Becca's unmasked face lingered long after she left Helen's porch. But the next blow didn't come from Becca. It came from Monica's voice on the phone 2 mornings later. Helen, she said, clipped as ever, there's something you need to see. At Monica's office, Helen sat across from her while Ray stood guard at the window. Monica slid a bank statement across the table. The numbers circled in red ink. $5,000, cashed 6 weeks ago. Helen frowned, squinting at the copy of the check. Her name sat neatly in the corner, but the signature sprawled like a stranger had borrowed her hand. The curve of the H was wrong. The tail of the T's too long. She knew her own pen strokes the way she knew her limp, unmistakable. "That's not me," she whispered. Monica nodded, tapping the paper. "I sent this to a handwriting expert. Their report came back this morning. It's a forgery." The word cut like a blade. Theft was one thing. Pills, cash, jewelry. But this was her name stolen, her identity twisted into Jason's currency. Ray's jaw flexed. Low doesn't begin to cover it. Monica's tone was all business. "This elevates everything. We're no longer talking about petty theft or exploitation. This is fraud. Criminal, prosecutable." Helen gripped her cane until her knuckles ached. She tried to picture Jason leaning over the check, pressing her name onto the line, cashing it without a flicker of guilt. Once he'd begged her for $20 to fill his tank. Now he was bleeding her dry behind her back. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Monica clicked through documents on her tablet. "The criminal case opens officially. Law enforcement will be notified. His employer will be alerted too. They won't want this kind of liability." It didn't take long. By the end of the week, Jason's manager called him into a small office with blinds drawn tight. No shouting, no accusations. Just a simple termination. Papers slid across a desk. Jason walked out of the auto parts store for the last time, his badge clipped from his belt. Helen didn't rejoice. She felt hollow, watching the dominoes fall. The boy who once marched across the stage in his graduation cap had traded futures for forged checks and pawn slips. Her bank called next. After reviewing the evidence Monica submitted, they reversed the fraudulent charge. $5,000, restored into her account with a digital chime that felt more like justice than luck. Helen stared at the balance on her screen, relief mixing with shame. That money should never have been stolen in the first place. That evening, Monica came by with her satchel and her certainty. She laid out the papers across Helen's table, her voice cool and unshaken. "This is no longer a family issue," Monica said, locking eyes with Helen. "It's a felony." The word echoed through the kitchen. Family had once been Helen's excuse, her shield, her prison. Family was what she'd whispered to herself when she handed Jason gas money, when she bit her tongue at his sharp words, when she told neighbors he was just having a hard year. Family had been her reason for silence. Now it was irrelevant. Ray stood at the sink, arms crossed, watching Helen's face as the truth settled. "Felony," he repeated, his voice almost a growl. "Can't sweet-talk your way out of that." Helen nodded slowly, her grip tightening on the edge of the table. She thought of Jason's last message, the threat hanging like smoke in her chest. Family or not, he had crossed into something he couldn't charm, couldn't mock, couldn't erase. Outside, the evening sky darkened over the neighborhood. Helen's phone buzzed again with a fresh alert from the cameras. She turned the screen toward Ray and Monica. The thumbnail showed Jason, not at her porch this time, but in her backyard. His face half in shadow, staring up at her window. Jason's shadow under her window lingered in Helen's mind, long after Monica forwarded the clip to the police. She barely had time to breathe before the next strike came. Not from his fists or his car tires this time, but from the courthouse itself. Monica arrived at Helen's doorstep with a manila envelope tucked under her arm. She laid the papers on the dining table, the legalese dense and merciless. "He filed this," Monica said, "claiming he's entitled to secure your assets in case of decline." Helen's eyes scanned the words, though they blurred together. Jason had gone from raiding her kitchen drawers to trying to lock down her life in court. Her cane trembled against the floor. "He's circling like a vulture." Ray leaned in, reading over her shoulder, his jaw set like stone. "More like a rat trying to gnaw through a safe." Monica pulled out her tablet, tapping rapidly. This is exactly why the paper trail matters. The police reports, the camera footage, the forged check, the pawn slip. He wants the court to believe he's protecting you. I'll show them he's exploiting you. Within days, Monica filed a cease and desist motion, attaching every shred of evidence Helen had bled onto paper over the last month. When the judge reviewed the case, the decision came swift and cold. Jason was barred from making any future claims on his mother's estate. Helen listened over the phone as Monica relayed the ruling. The words echoed like a church bell through her kitchen, blocked. For the first time, Helen felt her house breathe with her. The walls no longer felt porous, as if Jason could still slip through them with his old key. The little blue bungalow was hers again, legally, undeniably hers. But Monica wasn't finished. "We're not leaving it there," she said. "We're retitling this house into a revocable trust. That means Jason can't touch it. Not now, not later. Not even if he tries to worm his way back into your will." Helen signed the documents with a steady hand. Her name on the dotted line felt like a reclamation, each stroke a boundary Jason could never cross. The ink had barely dried when another bombshell dropped. Monica walked into Helen's kitchen carrying a stack of credit card statements. She pointed at one, a flagged transaction. "See this? Online clothing boutique, $300. Card stolen. Not in Jason's name." Helen frowned. "Then whose?" Monica flipped the page. The answer was written in neat black print. "Becca Lane." Ray's fist hit the table. Knew it. Those sharp hands of hers were all over the money, too. Monica wasted no time. "With this, we file for restraining orders. Both of them, financial, physical, electronic. They don't get near you, your property, or your accounts." Helen nodded, her chest tightening, but this time not from fear, from release. Every order, every filing, every signature was a brick laid between her life and theirs. That night, Helen sat on her porch beneath the hum of the wind chimes Ray had hung for her. She looked out at the lawn, quiet now, no shadows beneath her windows. For the first time in weeks, the night air didn't feel like an intruder's breath. Her phone buzzed, a message from Monica. The restraining orders were filed. The paperwork was moving. The law itself was leaning in her direction. Helen leaned back, exhaling, her eyes drifting to the stars. She'd fought wars in hospitals, patched wounds in deserts, buried her husband with honor. She never thought the fiercest battle would be inside her own home. The porch light flickered once, then again. Helen frowned, gripping her cane. She tapped the phone screen, pulling up the camera feed. The front yard was empty, but the side gate, once latched, swung slowly in the night breeze. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the kind of air that made every step echo heavier than it was. Helen leaned on her cane as she entered, Ray steady at her side. Monica led the way with her satchel, every stride crisp, purposeful. Jason and Becca were already seated at the defense table. They looked smaller than Helen remembered, subdued, each in borrowed suits that didn't quite fit. Jason's tie was crooked, his face shaven too clean. Becca wore her sweetness like a mask again, eyes wide and damp as though she'd rehearsed in the mirror, but neither dared to meet Helen's gaze. When the bailiff called the room to order, Helen felt her heart beat slow, like a drum she could march to. She settled in the witness chair, placed her cane across her lap, and fixed her eyes on the judge. "Mrs. Pratt," the judge began, his voice formal but softened with something like sympathy. "You understand you're here to testify regarding the petition for a permanent protective order?" "Yes, Your Honor," Helen said. Her voice didn't tremble. Monica guided her through the testimony. Helen spoke of the pills, the cash, the forged check, her words deliberate and unembellished. She didn't cry, she didn't plead. She simply laid out the truth, her hands folded tight to keep them from shaking. Then came the screens. Monica wheeled in a monitor, pressed play, and the courtroom filled with the tinny audio of Jason's laughter, Becca's mocking words, the rattle of pill bottles, the hiss of cruelty whispered behind Helen's back. 87 minutes of footage. Some jurors leaned forward. Others grimaced. Helen didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on Jason, who sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his leg bouncing under the table. Becca dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she didn't need. Halfway through, the judge raised his hand. "Enough," he said. His face had gone taut, his eyes hard. "I've seen more than I care to." Monica froze the screen on Jason counting money at Helen's desk. The judge leaned forward. His voice was sharp, stripped of patience. "You stole from a woman who clothed you, who raised you, who trusted you." His gaze flicked to Becca. "And you mocked her while you did it." Jason tried to speak. His lawyer tugged at his sleeve, urging silence. But the words died before they reached his mouth. Helen sat straighter, her hand tightening on her cane. For the first time, she felt the weight shift. She wasn't on trial. He was. The ruling came down with the finality of a gavel. The protective order is hereby made permanent. Neither Mr. Pratt nor Ms. Lane may approach or contact Mrs. Pratt by any means, physical, electronic, or otherwise. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. Jason's shoulders sagged. Becca bit her lip until it blanched. The judge's voice carried, echoing against the paneled walls. "Further restitution is ordered. Mr. Pratt and Ms. Lane will repay the amounts stolen, cash, property, forged funds. Payment schedule to be set by probation." Helen inhaled, the words like clean air after a long illness. Restitution. Not enough to erase the betrayal, but a start. As the gavel struck, the room stirred. Lawyers shuffled papers. The bailiff called for recess. Jason shot Helen a look across the aisle, not pleading, not even angry, hollow, as though he'd just realized the mask he'd worn all his life had been ripped away for good. Ray leaned close, murmuring under his breath, "He's bleeding now, Helen." Paper cuts can kill a man slow. Helen's lips tightened, but she said nothing. On the monitor behind Monica, the last frame of video still lingered. Jason glancing over his shoulder, pocketing her money like it was nothing, frozen in his own evidence. The bailiff called for the next case. Helen rose carefully, gripping her cane. The courtroom air pressed heavy, but her steps were steady as she walked out. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She pulled it out as Ray held the door. A new voicemail notification glowed. No number, just unknown caller. She pressed play. Jason's voice spilled out, low and ragged. "Court can't stop me, Mom. Not when you still live in that house." Helen replayed the voicemail once, twice, until the words blurred into a rasping hiss. "Court can't stop me, Mom." It was meant to frighten her, to remind her that even with papers signed and gavels struck, he still circled her life like a hawk. But Jason had underestimated the reach of the system and Monica's tenacity. 2 days later, Monica arrived with eyes sharper than usual, her tablet clutched tight. She set it on Helen's table and swiped to a new file. "Turns out your son's name doesn't stop at Tacoma," she said. "Another county's been building a case. Financial elder abuse. Different victim, same methods." Helen blinked. "Another woman. An older man, actually. Disabled vet. Jason offered to help with errands. Ended up emptying his account." Monica's tone was flat, merciless. "They've been waiting for the right moment to move. Thanks to your evidence, they've got it." Ray let out a low whistle. He's been running the same con in 2 counties. Dumb enough to think no one would compare notes. Monica smiled without humor. "They're comparing now. Cross claims are already being filed. Jason isn't fighting just one battle. He's fighting a war he can't afford." The news landed heavy in Helen's chest. Her pain was no longer hers alone. It belonged to others too. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. The next twist came from Becca. Cornered by the weight of evidence, her online silence cracked into desperation. She requested a private meeting through her attorney, offering partial cooperation in exchange for leniency. "She's flipping," Monica confirmed. "She'll hand Jason pieces we couldn't get otherwise. dates, accounts, transactions. She thinks it'll buy her lighter sentencing. Helen sat back in her chair, eyes narrowing. She stood in my kitchen and mocked me. And now, Monica said, she'll stand in a courtroom and help bury him. When the next hearing arrived, Helen faced a choice. Courthouse security offered her a wheelchair for the long walk inside. She waved it off. Her cane thumped the polished floor with each step, measured and deliberate. She heard Ray's voice at her shoulder, low and gruff. "You look taller," Helen managed a faint smile. I finally stood up. Inside, Jason was pale, his suit rumpled, his hair unkempt. His confidence, once endless, once cruel, had drained out of him. He shuffled papers, whispered angrily with his lawyer, glanced often at Becca, who sat rigid across the aisle, refusing to meet his eye. The prosecutor laid out the new charges, a chain of words that seemed to stretch on forever. Exploitation, forgery, fraud, cross-claims from multiple victims. Each count piled like stone on Jason's shoulders. Jason's jaw worked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Finally, after a tense exchange with his attorney, he stood. His voice was smaller than Helen had ever heard it. "I'll plead guilty," he said. The courtroom rustled. Even the judge arched a brow. "To avoid full trial," Jason added quickly. His lawyer's hand clamped on his arm. Helen's grip on her cane tightened. She thought of the boy she'd raised, the man he'd become, and the hollow voice on her voicemail telling her papers couldn't save her. And now here he was surrendering not out of remorse, but out of calculation. The judge nodded, expression unreadable. Very well. Guilty plea entered. Sentencing to follow. Jason sank back into his chair, his head low. Becca's shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes darted nervously toward Helen, as if seeking forgiveness she'd never receive. Helen sat straighter, spine tall, cane balanced across her knees like a staff. She felt no triumph, only clarity. The law had caught Jason, but the story wasn't over, because guilty or not, men like him didn't fade quietly. The night after Jason's guilty plea, Helen sat at her kitchen table with a blank page before her. The silence was thick, broken only by the steady hum of the refrigerator and the faint chime of the windbells. Ray had hung on her porch. She had written reports, signed affidavits, given testimony, but none of those had been her words. Tonight, they would be. Her pen hovered, then scratched across the page with a slow, determined hand. I saw his first step. Then I watched him steal mine. The sentence burned, but it was true. She kept writing, letting the words come in jagged bursts. She wrote of the boy who once left flowers on her nightstand, the man who now drained her bank account without shame. She wrote of laughter that turned cruel, of the trust that cracked like glass. She didn't beg readers to pity her. She asked them to see, to recognize the shadows, hiding in plain sight. When she finished, she sent the piece to the local paper, unsure if it would ever leave the inbox. She went to bed lighter, though, as if releasing the words into the world had shifted their weight off her chest. By morning, her phone lit up. A neighbor had tagged her in a post, then a friend from church, then someone she hadn't spoken to in 30 years. Her piece had been published online, and it spread faster than gossip in a small town. Calls came first. Fellow veterans, former patients, strangers who said they'd been waiting for someone to put into words what they'd lived through. Then letters, handwritten, trembling ink from seniors who confessed they, too, had children who stole checks, pawned jewelry, mocked their weakness. Some included $5 bills, folded tight. Others offered casseroles, rides, prayers. One morning, Ray shuffled in carrying a manila envelope from the print shop down the street. He laid a framed copy of her words on the table, the headline bold across the top. "You said what others couldn't," he told her, voice rough. "Now they don't have to choke on it alone." Helen touched the glass lightly. For the first time, her shame had transformed into something else. Armor, maybe, or a signal fire. Monica stopped by the following week, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She set her satchel down, glanced at the framed piece, and gave a small approving nod. "This isn't just a statement," she said. "It's advocacy. You should be speaking on panels, Helen. Elder protection boards, veterans groups. People will listen." Helen hesitated. "I'm no speaker." "You've already spoken," Monica said simply. "You survived. That's a speech." The sentencing came 2 weeks later. Jason stood before the judge in shackles, eyes sunken, suit borrowed and wrinkled. Becca sat several rows back, not beside him. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, curious neighbors, and the quiet rustle of strangers who had come to see justice made visible. The judge's voice was steady, final. 2 years incarceration, restitution required, payments to begin immediately upon release. Jason bowed his head, but Helen didn't mistake it for remorse. It was defeat, heavy and bitter. She gripped her cane, spine tall, and let herself breathe. Afterward, the courthouse steps swarmed with voices. Helen walked carefully down them, Ray at her side, reporters calling her name. She said nothing, only lifted her chin. Silence, she realized, could speak louder than words when the whole world was listening. That evening, back at her kitchen table, Helen signed the paperwork to establish the Pratt Fund, a local initiative for exploited seniors. The first deposit came from her own restored savings, the next from donations that had trickled in after her piece was published. Within days, the fund grew enough to sponsor legal aid hours, groceries, and locks for doors that had been broken into too many times. Helen ran her hand over the fresh folder, her husband's folded flag resting beside it. She whispered to the empty room, "Something good at last." Ray knocked once before stepping inside, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He set one before her, studied the folder, then met her eyes. "You built something he can't touch," he said. Helen nodded, but before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A new notification. Not from Jason this time. He was behind bars. From someone else. The message was brief. "If he could do it, so can mine. Can you help me?" The morning light slanted across Helen's living room, catching on the stack of folders she had neatly arranged the night before. The fund paperwork, the legal rulings, the restraining orders. Each one a scar, but also a record of survival. On the mantel, tucked behind the flag that had rested there since her husband's funeral, sat a photo frame she hadn't touched in years. Jason at 12, grinning wide with a baseball glove too big for his hand. Her arm draped across his shoulders. That smile, before the lies, before the thefts, had been real once. She lifted the frame, her fingers brushing the dust from the glass. For a moment her throat ached, the pressure of tears pressing behind her eyes, but none came. Instead, she sighed, long and steady. "I won't burn you," she whispered to the boy in the picture. "But I won't let you live here either." She slid the photo out, tucked it into a manila folder, and scrawled one word across the front in her careful hand. "Before." She sealed it with a strip of tape and set it in the back of her desk drawer. Not destroyed, not displayed, contained. Later that afternoon, Ray came by carrying a box under his arm. He set it on her porch rail, pried it open, and held up a wind chime of brushed copper. The tubes glinted in the sunlight, soft as old pennies. "Thought your porch could use a new sound," he said. Together they hooked the chime under the eave. When the breeze caught it, the first notes rang, low, resonant, steady. Helen closed her eyes. For the first time in months, the sound outside her door wasn't Jason's fists or Becca's laughter. It was peace. Ray leaned on the railing, watching her face. "Not bad, huh?" "Better than silence," Helen said, smiling faintly. That evening, Monica arrived for one last visit with a stack of papers clipped neatly together. She slid them onto the table with a rare smile, softening her sharp features. "Case is officially closed," she said. "Protective order permanent. Restitution schedule in place. Your trust finalized." And she tapped the last page. "You've been appointed to the City Council's Senior Advisory Board. Unanimous vote. Helen blinked. Me? You, Monica confirmed. They want someone who's lived it. Someone who'll say the things no one else will. Helen leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of it sink in. From victim to advocate, from silence to voice. The arc of her months had been jagged and brutal, but here she was, standing, still standing. Ray fetched 2 glasses from the cupboard and poured sweet tea, sliding one toward her. His eyes crinkled at the edges. Still breathing! Helen lifted her glass, held his gaze, and answered without hesitation. Now I am. They clinked glasses, the chimes singing outside, Monica stacking her files neatly as though she were closing a chapter for all of them. When the night fell, Helen sat alone on the porch, the wind chime whispering above her, the stars sharp against the dark sky. She thought of the boy she'd raised, the man who had betrayed her, and the strangers who now looked to her for help. She thought of the words she'd written on that sealed folder, before, and how much heavier after could be. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. Another message, this time from a woman she didn't know. My daughter took my checks. I don't know what to do. Can you talk to me? Helen stared at the screen, the copper chime humming softly overhead. She picked up the phone, not with dread this time, but with certainty. The morning was cool, mist clinging to the grass in her backyard. Helen stepped out with her cane, but she found she didn't lean on it quite as heavily as she once had. She took her time, walking the full perimeter of the little blue bungalow, the copper wind chime on the porch humming behind her. Every corner she passed was familiar. The patch where raccoons used to dig, the spot where Jason had once stood in shadow, the gate Ray had fixed and fastened with new iron. Her cameras winked from the eaves, silent sentries. She paused beneath one and tilted her face up. Once she had dreaded what those lenses would reveal. Now they were keepers of peace. She pulled out her phone, opened the feed, and saw only what she'd prayed for months ago. An empty porch, a quiet yard, sunlight catching on dew. No threats, no smirks, no shadows. Helen exhaled, her breath fogging in the cool air. That afternoon, Monica called with news. It's official, she said. Your case, your footage, your testimony, they're being added to the state's training program on elder abuse. Required viewing for every new hire. Helen sat back in her chair, stunned for a moment. Her story would live on in courtrooms and classrooms, teaching others what she had learned the hard way. Not as tragedy, but as warning. Ray, sitting across the table with his coffee, gave a low chuckle. You've gone from a name on a file to a lesson in the book. Helen smiled faintly. If it saves someone else, I'll take it. As evening settled, a knock sounded on her door, gentle, uncertain. Helen rose, cane tapping softly, and opened it. A young woman stood on the step. She couldn't have been more than 30, her eyes wide and ringed with fatigue. She twisted her hands together like she was trying to wring the fear out of them. Mrs. Pratt, she asked softly. Helen nodded. I live 2 streets over, the woman said. I read your story. My son, he's only 16, but he started taking things. Cash? Cards? He yells when I say no. I'm scared it'll get worse. Her voice cracked. I don't know what to do. Helen studied her for a long moment. She recognized the look, the mixture of shame and desperation she had once carried herself. The look of a person who still wanted to believe love could outweigh betrayal. Come inside, Helen said gently. She led the woman to the kitchen, set her at the table, and poured tea into 2 chipped mugs. The steam rose between them, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. Helen settled across from her, the cane resting against her chair, her hand steady on the mug. Let's start with what you've seen, Helen said. Her voice was calm, deliberate. And then we'll start writing it down. The young woman nodded, tears glimmering but not falling. She reached for the pen Helen had laid beside a notepad, her hand trembling as she pressed it to paper. Helen watched her, remembering her own first report. The uneven scrawl of words she had thought no one would ever believe, And now here she was, guiding someone else through that same first step. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the chime into a soft chorus. Helen looked toward the porch, toward the cameras, toward the quiet house she had reclaimed. Her lips curved into something small but certain. "I forgot to tell my son the camera was fixed," she said, her voice low but steady. "And that's how I remembered who he really was.